The market seemingly thinking it's a disappointment. Did you think it was a disappointment?
Hi, Caroline. I was not disappointed with the actual numbers here. I think, expectations were very high going into this particular print. And, especially when you hear of things like events in New York in which, bars were being rented out to see what the earnings report was going to be, it gets to a different level. I was not in one. I was at my desk looking at the numbers.
Joe Weisenthal, I saw, our Bloomberg reporter, was indeed out there in the bars. But I'm interested, Ayako, in, even though you did see this overall disappointment and very high expectations, was there any cause for concern? Do you still think, as Ed put to our previous guest, Anthony, that the AI trade is intact?
The AI trade is intact. I think we have to put this in the longer term context. Nvidia was generating revenues of about 27 billion about 2 years ago. They're on pace to generate revenues of over 125 billion this year. That's just enormous. Is that growth rate sustainable? It clearly is not. But they're continuing to grow, and the expectations are for growth of over 40% in revenues for next year. And Blackwell is just going to be another step up in allowing that to happen.
Ayako, Wealth Enhancement Group has 7.8 million Nvidia shares, like $1 billion worth of stock. I know that you were part of our kind of watch party last night, watching the interview. You lead research, right? You use your expertise to try and work out what's going on. What did you work out during the course of that conversation?
I think this is a long game. I think we're still in the early innings of AI deployment. The hyperscalers, Meta, there's so much use from all of these. It is table stakes for these large cloud providers. And they're seeing productivity gains from the use of AI. So I think that's going to continue. It's going to proliferate. It is going to take time, but the internet took time as well. And 20 years later, it's still evolving.
Were you convinced by what Jensen Huang just said? We played in that clip just then, that their business has broadened out beyond the hyperscalers.
Yes, I mean, they mentioned about, sovereign entities purchasing and being in that low double-digit billions of dollars in terms of revenues. That was exciting to see. And, hyperscalers were 45%, which means 55% is other revenues. So that is a nice diversification as well. But that consistency from the hyperscalers is likely to continue. It's just going to be choppy year to year. Many of these companies, Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, Google, they're all going to be evaluating their CapEx budgets for next year. And each year it's not going to be the same. And so we have to be diligent about that. But for the most part, they will be spending in order to get that productivity enhancement going forward.
What about competition? A lot of people feeling that if there is just a slight blip in this annual cadence of innovation, maybe AMD can start to work its way in a little bit more. Do you agree?
Sure. I think from a hyperscaler perspective, or from the cloud providers, the internet service providers, you always want to have more than just one provider of your chips. So, there is room for competition. I think, that's always something that we have to keep in mind. Let's not forget that Intel had the majority of data center server share for many, many years. And here we are with Nvidia really coming out and taking share, AMD as well. So competition is always something that we look for and watch out for.
Cautionary tale. What's interesting is you have holds on Texas Instruments, on Broadcom. What many have thought perhaps hasn't moved at the pace that we're expecting was that these hyperscalers would make their own chips to compete in quite the same way, using a Texas Instruments, using CSMC, for example. I'm interested in if ever you see that really coming in as a competition.
It's tough. The design part of those chips is, where Nvidia has the advantage, along with the software associated with AI. So, their Cuda, all the chips are built off of Cuda, and that really provides them with the benefit that many other chip providers and chip manufacturers just don't have.
Ayako, can you define what Nvidia is, what it actually is?
Nvidia is a chip maker at the end of the day, right? But it is a chip maker and is a primary beneficiary for artificial intelligence and how computing will go forward in the coming decade.